everyone, and welcome back to The Apex, a weekly conversation with the titans and tastemakers of the automotive world. If you've been enjoying our podcasts and want to help us out, please do share them with your friends and leave a review for us on whatever platform you're listening on. Our guest this week is prolific entrepreneur and businessman, and not to mention car guy, David Brown. Proudly drawing on Britain's automotive heritage, his car company, David Brown Automotive, has grown significantly since its founding in 2013 and now works with over 70 British-based suppliers, combining small-scale manufacturing with a bespoke coach building to produce limited edition automobiles for discerning clients. We've managed to catch David today for a discussion about his career and love of cars, and we're very excited to have him on. David, welcome to the Apex.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Hector. Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. So, first question, could you tell us a bit about your early years and your first experiences with cars and how you got into, automotive things?
Yes, no problem. I was born in Yorkshire to a family that were a family of timber leaders. So a timber leader is someone that chops trees down and takes them to a sawmill. So right from an early age, I was being told not to touch things, not to go anywhere near things. It was all dangerous. The family's operations, which were based here in Yorkshire, were all about machinery and the use of machinery. So from an early age, I watched my father, who you can't quite see here, but on my office wall here, I've got my two heroes. One is Roger Daltrey, and the other is my father. I don't know they have got on well together, but my father became, as a consequence of being a user of things, became a great designer and started many businesses. But he was also very much a driver. And early memories are being frightened to death by him in cars that, by today's standards, were awful. He went on the Monte Carlo rally a couple of times when it was a proper rally. I think he started in Scotland, and they all met up somewhere around Paris from different points of Europe, and then headed off to Monte Carlo. And so there were always cars and special cars in the family's arsenal from as far back as I can ever remember. As I said, I grew up with both an engineering background from age nothing to a love of cars that came always all from my father.
And so I think many readers and listeners, they might not be fully aware of that business and manufacturing background that you mentioned. So maybe before we get to the modern day and your other car exploits, could you tell us a bit more about that family history and kind of what the environment was that you grew up in?
Yeah, so as I say, my father go into a forest, chop trees down, take them to a sawmill. Every element of that was a learning experience for everybody involved in it. And so a little while when I was, I don't know how old I'd be now, but 5 or 6, he got a job as a designer. He designed himself a crane to work in forests. And he exhibited the crane at what's now called the Great Yorkshire Show, and was immediately offered a job as an engineer in a manufacturing company in Leeds. So he went there to work there, and he designed a few revolutionary things because he had no training as a draftsman or as a designer. He just had a practical experience. But he was brilliant at being able to see something on paper in 3D and to envisage how it would all work together. So this is in the days when everything was quite simply drawn out on a piece of paper, and you had to imagine how it was all going to fit together. And he's very successful at that. And he was promoted within that company, then poached by another company, building earth-moving equipment in Blackburn. That company was called Chayside. It was bought by JCB and became the backbone of some of their products as they went. He then worked for other companies and latterly worked for a company called Muirhill in Gloucester. So I grew up not in Yorkshire, but actually in the Cotswolds. And that company manufactured earth-moving machines, loading shovels, agricultural tractors, and military vehicles. And they all came from concepts and ideas that my father had. So while he was doing that, I was busy being a singer in a rock band. And so, as far as I was concerned, that's where my future lay. Me and Roger Gentry together on stage somewhere in, I don't know, Los Angeles.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But after a little while, he thought, I'm not going to work for everybody else ever again. I'm going to start, I've been doing all this for so long, I'll start my own business. At the time, one of the best places to do that was in the northeast of England. There were all sorts of development grants available for companies starting there. I didn't want to move to the northeast. I wanted to stay being a rock star. And he said, no problem, you stay, find somewhere to live because we're off. So eventually I couldn't find anywhere to live, so I moved to a place called Peterlee in County Durham. And that's where we started the engineering company that built earth-moving vehicles. That company had a revolutionary design in many respects, and that was an articulated off-highway dump truck. So that the sort of things you see now literally all over the world, doing all sorts of different jobs. In many respects, the sort of wheelbarrow of the construction site. That product took off quite quickly, really, and we ended up selling those vehicles literally all over the world. And it was fascinating because they got used in all sorts of different applications and different places. So they would be used. We built vehicles to go down. There's a mine in Finland called Kiruna Mine, and it's one of the deepest mines in the world. So we had to build these vehicles that went down. I can't remember how many thousands of feet they went down. They just went in a circle, down and down and down, and brought the ore back up. And you end up with a specific problem associated with that particular application, which is quite different from other ones. So in, I think it was Iran, we built some vehicles that were building a breakwater, and it wasn't very wide, so they had to reverse down for about 2 miles. So we built a pivoting cab so that the driver would literally turn around in the cab so you could drive easier. And then as you turn your seat round, you realize your steering's the wrong way around now. So that was an interesting one where we had to develop a steering system that reversed itself as you faced in the opposite direction. The reason for all those stories is that there were lots of different things that you had to think about within the concept of the actual vehicle itself. The other side of that business, which is relevant to the car company that we now have, is the manufacturing processes. So we were always the first to buy something really, really new in terms of a plasma burner, for example. Plasma burner cuts steel, and it cuts it at relatively cold temperatures. Consequentially, you don't get any distortion in the steel. And when you can do that, you can then design things in a different way to take advantage of that particular part of the manufacturing process. So all the time, we were at the forefront of technology as far as machinery is concerned. We were always experimenting with new things, and that always led to, ultimately, an improvement in the way you could make things.
So I guess we take that, and I know that after you left that company, you've had a string of other businesses as well. So I suppose the business knowledge comes into that. So I guess this all leads to David Brown Automotive itself. And what was the inspiration for that particular company?
Well, the inspiration, at one stage I owned a DB5, which I thought I've got to buy because it's got my name on the front of it somewhere. And I really liked the car. It was this one had been converted to be a racing DB5, and it still had quite a few of those features left on it. So you could chuck it in a corner, the limited slip diff would kick in, and you could slide it around the corner, and it was good fun. But, and it's a big but, it was massively unreliable. And at one stage, after a trip out one day, I remember waiting for the AA to recover me because the top hose had burst. And if it wasn't the top hose, it would be an electrical problem. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm going to re-engine this thing. So I spoke to a few friends, and they said, you can't re-engine that. You'll destroy its value. So I decided I'd make a car that was synonymous with all the things I liked from the 60s. And that's basically the car, the Speedback GT that I started to make. But a lot of people say, well, how do you actually go about making a car? And that never dawned on me that that was an issue or a problem because of all the experiences coming back from making things previously. When I had the earth, I eventually took over in the earth moving company, and I sold those companies to Caterpillar. And when I did that, I bought a whole series of other businesses which were largely lifestyle related. So I had men's, ladies' clothes shops. I started a ladies' shoe store chain. I'd won the award for the best department store in the UK, which I shared with Selfridges, so I was quite proud of that.
Wow.
The long and short of it is I had a lot of experience in the lifestyle side of business. So work the earth moving side. If you went to a show, it was normally in a quarry. Collecting an award for a fashion brand was in a completely different environment.
Yeah.
And but the manufacturing experience and everything that I'd built up, and even after I'd sold the businesses, the manufacturing businesses, I kept massively in touch with the technology that was going on. And one of the biggest things by far was the digitization of information. So I remember seeing a friend who made a pedal box for his car using a 5-axis CNC milling machine. And this pedal box was beautiful. It was hidden, by the way. You couldn't see it once it was there. But it was gorgeous. And I just thought, hey, you can make things now that you couldn't have made years ago simply by using this new technology. So when we started to make the Speedback, the initial way of doing that was to, if you think about the days when Rolls-Royce or Bentley made cars, they didn't make the complete car, they made a rolling chassis. And somebody else put the bodywork on top of that. So Mulliner, Park Ward, all those people and famous names from the past. And I wanted to be able to do the same because I didn't want to have to reinvent. I've seen plenty of people make their own engines, for example, and just have it bankrupt. But it made sense to use componentry that already existed. And so I started to make the Speedback GT using, if you like, a rolling chassis. And the one that we chose for that was the Jaguar XKR because it had everything about it was right, from the way in which it's manufactured. It's a series of bonded aluminium parts that we could use and join our pieces to them in the same way that they made the complete car. It also had something I really wanted, which was a V8 British engine, to make a genuine GT. So using that, we made a clay model of the entire car at full size. And that was to get the styling cues in there. And the cues that we used were everything from the 60s. So we would, for example, when we went into the styling studio, we had no pictures of cars, but we had pictures of lifestyle things from that period.
Interesting.
One of which was Sophia Loren lying on a sunbed. And And if you want some curvy inspiration, you can get it by looking at that. And but genuinely, we played rock music from the period. Not sure what we drank, but we drank some stuff as well.
So it sounds like full immersion, just complete mental kind of focus.
It was, and the 60s themselves were probably one of the most interesting periods in our contemporary history. In the 50s were a diabolical era because everyone was poor. Britain couldn't even feed itself, let alone design something really sexy. The 60s came along and suddenly there was money, but there was also, more importantly, that was a social liberation. So music was liberated. Music changed totally during that period of time. Art changed completely. Sex changed. Everything changed. Style changed. And so getting into why some of today's most valuable classic cars come from that period of time. And they come from that period of time because they're actually the most beautiful. And they weren't constrained by everything as it went forward. So that's how we came up with the style of the Speedback GT. And people will say it looks like a DB5. Well, first of all, thank you very much. It doesn't. You see the two things side by side. Depending on your frame of reference, people in Italians see it as having a 250 short wheelbase and a Maserati front. Germans have seen it as Porsches, and Americans see the back end as a muscle car. In my mind, it is not a pastiche of different things. It is complete in its own right. In that sense, you have this complete vehicle that reflects a lot of the characteristics of the 60s, but on a contemporary chassis, if you like, with all of the modern facilities and features that you would expect from a car from today. Having made the clay model, you're using skills there that are ancient in terms of modeling something. We actually made two sides to the clay model and decided which side we liked the most. They weren't massively different, but there was subtle change to them. And then this is where digitization comes in. So that clay model was scanned. The half of the car that we liked was mirrored and flipped onto the other side. And that digital information, which is, even in those, I'm sure there are software programs that will do it easier today than they were 8-9 years ago when we did it. Every square millimeter of that car is recognized in that digital file. That same information then gets used to using a 5-axis CNC milling machine to create the hammer forms, which are the things that the man on the English wheel with a skill that light in the UK still got, curves that metal until it matches the shape of the hammer form, which is the inside, if you like, of the digital representation. So you get with that a gigantic amount of accuracy. So if you look at some of the cars made using that English wheel, and so if in the past people would create, for example, take a DB5. That was styled in Italy. No, that was all those cars at the time were styled by the same people in the same car, looking at photographs of Sophie Redline and Sunbed. And in doing that, they would create a clay model. The two halves of the car would be different because they're just going to be different. Somebody then had to measure that clay model and produce these hammer forms using just old-fashioned carpentry skills. Well, with the best will in the world, there were always going to be mistakes. One side was absolutely not going to be the same as the other side. And this is where the digital side gets rid of that problem.
So how easy is it to do all of this kind of in a modern context as a small-scale British manufacturer? I mean, obviously we've got the technology, but the panel beating, the hand-formed elements, the hand-built elements of this car, I mean, what are the keys to success if you're a small manufacturing company and, you know, you need to find the right people, the right knowledge, I mean, even the right tooling? What kind of challenges did you encounter with that?
I think there's a gigantic difference which is not appreciated. You see our Speedback GT sat side by side with a contemporary car from anybody else that's made in volume. Yeah. And the way those two cars are made is gigantically different. So if you want to, if you can be sure you're going to get a high volume, then you tool up in a different way and you will press a part, just stamp it out and it's that's it. The cost of that tooling is enormous, but the piece part cost is much, much less because the piece part cost doesn't have all of that skilled labour in. The UK is great in that its coach building history has never really fizzled out. So it has a reputation, but it also has the skill for that. So, the English wheel is not called, with all due respect, the French or the German wheel. It's called the English wheel because that's where it came from. But that bit of technology, now I don't know if you know what those two things look like, but they just look like two metal wheels touching each other. That was used to build stagecoaches. What I really like about what we do is that we use a combination of those traditional skills along with digital information. And the digital information gives both accuracy but also beauty because you can create things on a 5-axis CNC milling machine that you could never otherwise have done as a small manufacturer. We then have our cars are handmade as opposed to hand finished. And, what we mean by that is that and you'll see all the manufacturers showing somebody putting a final coat of polish on or whatever, and they're hand finishing it. We will take blocks of an aluminium ingot and we will shape that thing into whatever it's going to become on the car. So we hand make it, and it's that hand making that allows us to make things in volume, but more expensive.
So tell us a bit about your customers. I mean, who tends to buy David Brown cars? It must be quite an interesting mix of people.
It is. There's quite a few people who, like me, own classic cars or have had classic cars, love them because they're beautiful, but also know that they're not particularly reliable. And depending on what they want to do with them, means that they want something that has that 60s DNA, for lack of a better description, but within a reliable set of components that they don't have to worry about. So most of the Speedback GT owners will use their cars on a daily basis because they can do that. If they had the classic equivalent, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Lamborghini from that period, most of them would only use it if they had an AA van following behind. So they're all appreciative people. They're all knowledgeable people. I would say we're friends with all of them. They're all nice people. They just get what we're doing and why it is so different. They want a luxurious car. They want something that predominantly is different to anything else that the next door neighbor might have. They admire what we do. We get a lot of credibility for being this British manufacturer of beautiful things with a lot of British everything's in it.
And just to move on a bit, because I know that you've collected quite a few classic cars in your time, but I also know that you, I think you were once a competitive rally driver. Is that right?
Yeah, I used to rally in the sort of 80s and 90s, or was it the 90s and 10s? Can't remember now. But so, I rallied a Subaru nationally in the UK, and I won the Group N Championship in that. And then I decided to build myself a car, so I built a World Rally car using Ford Escort components. And that was bloody excellent, that thing. So that was a Ford Puma 4-wheel drive with sequential box. And if I didn't win rallies, I used to win prizes for the scariest, loudest thing going down a forest at 3 a.m. in the morning, which also pleased me a lot.
Yeah. I just love this combination of, a love for classic cars, manufacturing a sort of modern equivalent, and also loving just thrashing a Ford Puma with WRC bits in it down a forest track. It sounds like you've really covering off all the bases there.
Well, the other thing I've started to do is do some endurance rallies, which are a different thing altogether. So, for example, Peking to Paris, which is a hell of a long way. It's a 1927 Rolls-Royce Phantom 2 that belonged to a friend of mine. And it broke down every single solitary day. There was something went wrong with it. And to be honest, it wasn't actually the original parts of that car. It was actually the parts that had been added on over years.
Interesting.
Problems. And it was amazing. But, those things are called endurance rallies for a very, very good reason. You have to enjoy your navigator. So, but that's more of an adventure, whereas the rallies were the ordinary normal rallies were very competitive. But when I used to rally, I used to get to the start of the first stage, and often these things, first stage would be 6 o'clock in the morning in Dalby Forest. And everyone would be lined up with freezing cold, and all the rest of the drivers were either being sick through nerves or having a wee in the trees. And if I could have reclined my seat, I'd have had another 5 minutes sleep before it was time for me to be off. Which never did me any good, because the first stages, they were always quicker than me. And it used to take me bloody ages to catch up. And it was all because I didn't wind myself up at the beginning. And I had to do it slowly throughout the course of the day.
It's interesting performance advice there. So, David, we're coming up on time. So I've got 3 kind of relatively quick fire questions to maybe end with. Okay. So the first one is, what vehicles have inspired you most in your career? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be cars, but we like cars.
There's a few. I mean, some of the earth-moving equipment that we built was fantastic. And, one of the vehicles we built would weigh 100 tons, and it would go across the quarry floor at 45 miles an hour. And it had suspension that was just unbelievable, really, brakes, etc., everything like that. The other car that inspired me is the Mini, and we haven't talked about Mini Remastered. That was a product that we wanted to produce to give the company more volume. It was one of the, and it was also my first car. It was one of the best. The person I described as one of my heroes, my father used to describe the Mini as the best engineered car ever and the worst manufactured car ever. And we decided we could do a great job of, if you like, remanufacturing it, remastering it. And it is still, when I look at that car and I look at the detail, a marvel of engineering that first started in the 60s. The 50s. So, and again, a fascinating thing there. It started in the 50s. This period of destitution almost across the world as a cheap family car. Gets to the 60s, and suddenly it's a trendy thing that broke down class barriers. And, so you would get a worker at British Leyland driving one, and you get Lord Snowdon driving one. And suddenly they're all in the same thing. So it became a fashion statement as well. Then it also became a great rally car. So that, I think, is still one of the most inspiring cars ever. And I've got to tell you, because this is an opportunity to do so, I think our version of it and what we do with it is absolutely superb. And you get people who, and the same applies to me, you look at it and you smile. You get out of it and you're still smiling. And it's one of those things that just invokes sheer pleasure. And it does so for a whole multitude of reasons. And so, I guess that was one of the most influential cars in my lifetime.
Yeah, we'll definitely link some pictures and links to that in the published article. And I guess my second quickfire question kind of leads on from those, which is: do you still have a dream car that you're chasing or you'd like to get? And if so, what is it?
No, not really. In the sense that the dream cars, in many respects, are clearly the ones that I make. And I make them, and I've got them. So I've got that dream. I'm fascinated by other bits of technology and see where electric car design will go. And I do like at the moment the Hyundai and the Kia new cars that have just come out, the EV6 and the
Ionic,
And I admire them because they've started from a completely different premise, it seems, to everybody else. And I think that I'm fascinated to see where that will all go with technology that will just do so much for you.
I think that's a common thread with some of the designers we've had on who are excited about what people will do with these new drivetrains and how they can design things that are just a bit different but still fun and engaging and, hitting all the right buttons.
It's weird as that because, we've got some people who bought our Mini Remastered and they've all said that they're going to use it to teach their children to drive because they know that if they can drive that, they can drive anything because it's got no electronic bits to help you. But at the same time, there will be a generation one day that couldn't possibly drive something like that. And because there will be cars that literally drive for them. So it does fascinate me.
Yeah, it's a fascinating future ahead. And speaking of generations, last quick-fire question is, what's the greatest lesson you've learned in your life, both as an entrepreneur and a car maker?
Greatest lesson in life is that nothing is ever quite as good or as bad as it first seems to be. So I think most of the time, and in this world of almost immediate responses and instant emails, instant WhatsApps, etc., nothing better than just taking a step back sometimes and reflecting before you commit your lunatic behavior.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. David, thank you so much for joining us today. That was a really wonderful interview. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
The Apex is powered by Custodian, a new platform for car enthusiasts designed to help you manage your car from anywhere. Using the latest technology, it takes the pain out of ownership and lets you just enjoy the drive, because Custodian will take care of the rest. So if you believe life starts after 6,000 RPM, you need to be on Custodian. Join us now at www.custodian.club to sign up for early access and get ready to enjoy your car like never before.